Hello everybody. This video is about the Mesoamerican counting system. So I want to talk about the counting system in general terms, and prior to getting to the specifics of the Mesoamerican counting system, I want to provide a little context, a little temporal geographical context, and a little bit of explanation of what we mean by Mesoamerica first, so we can then contextualize this counting system and go over the basics. My name is Nathan Wilson. I'm an anthropological archaeologist. I focus specifically on Mesoamerica, and even more specifically, I have a lot of experience in working and publishing on the cultures and groups of the Mexican Gulf Coast region, specifically the state of Veracruz. So today, Mesoamerican counting system. Before we get specifically to the Mesoamerican counting system, I just want to highlight and to put emphasis on the fact that there are many different counting systems. Oftentimes, people use a certain system and think that that's the only system that exists. But there are many. There are many different systems. Mesoamerican counting system is one of many, and one of the primary differences is the base of the system, the base number with which we use multiples to count. The most common system in today, at least that I understand, is the decimal system, the base 10. But there are many other systems that exist and have existed throughout a long period of history. Mesoamerican system is not a base 10 system, so that's a very important distinction, a very important difference. So many people today are familiar with the system, the decimal system, using 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, 0 to 10, and then multiples of 10 throughout. The base is 10. And also the way that the numbers are written with different digits, we can construct in a base 10 decimal system, the system that I use, we only have to use from 0 to 9, and then using those 10 digits, we can construct any number that exists, because the position of individual numbers is important. The position, the relative position of different digits, how many digits are involved, and with those numbers, we can determine what, or with those digits, we can determine what number is represented. The way we speak, the names of the numbers also are related to the system that is being used. The base 10 system, the way we say a number, 1,342, for example, each digit refers to a specific amount, quantity, related to 10. We'll see that in a minute, but that's important to identify and then to understand that the Mesoamerican system is not a base 10. So we need to kind of get away from thinking within the context of our own system when we want to look at a different counting system. So the most common system that we use in the base 10 system is the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, very common in many parts of the world, as well, the English-speaking world, for example. This is a base 10, and position of the digits, the relative position of the digits, is important. So like I said, the most common system today, it's been around, this specific system, as far as I understand, has been around, maybe the earliest, if I recall correctly, is almost 2,000 years ago. Now there were base 10, there were base systems that existed before that, but this combination of the base 10 and this specific positional notation, this specific Hindu-Arabic system, it's close to 2,000 years old, from what I understand. There's arguments on its origin, but some people pointed out or argued that, well, it's a base 10 system. Well, probably came from using fingers to count. I don't know if that's true or not, or if there's supporting evidence for that. That's what I have read. And when I talk about the position of the numbers, so we have 4 numbers here, and they all have the same digits, 3 1s and 1 3, but they all represent different numbers because the relative position of the 3 changes, and that tells us that these indicate different values. And within each system, we can see that each digit in this base 10 system represents a certain value relative to multiples of 10. So in the first number, 1,113, the way we say it, we have to identify each non-zero digit in this number. 1,000 first, 100 second, and then 13. And the 1000, what it really tells us is we have one cycle of 10 cycles of 10. The next one in the 100 means we have 10 cycles of 10, just 10 cycles of 10. And in the next one, the 1 in the 13 indicates that we have one cycle of 10. And the last 3 is we only have 3. Well, if we were to get to completing one cycle of 10, then we would have to raise the next number over the 10 spot from 1 to 2, which means that it would indicate that we have moved from one cycle of 10 to 2 cycles of 10. But each number here in this base 10 decimal system refers to a specific quantity related to multiples of 10, because 10 is the base. Now, Mesoamerican system again, not a base 10. So, like I said, within the decimal system, we basically have to learn just the basics of the system, and we can construct any number that we need to. We have to start with 1 to 10, and then 10 to 20, and the way we write those refers to cycles of 10. Same thing. So basically, to learn the decimal system, and I've seen this with my kids, you learn 0 to 19, and then after that, you have to learn the multiples, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. And you can combine those multiples with that prior knowledge of, for example, 0 to 9, and now you can construct any number from 1 to 99 or 0 to 99. I have seen that with my kids. They learn 1 to 20, and then they learn 21 to 29, and then all I have to do is go, what's the next number? I say, well, it's 30. They go, oh, okay. So then they know, based on that system being decimal, they just intuitively know from learning this that all they have to do to construct the next numbers is 31, 32, 33, 34 to 39. Then they ask me, well, what comes next after 39 and 40? All I have to say is 40, and they know it's 40, 41, 42 to 49, because that system repeats itself. Now, once you get to completing 10 cycles of 10, you get to 100, you have to add a new multiple. In the decimal system, we have 100. And then all you have to learn is 100, 200, 300, 400 to 900 with that prior knowledge of 1 to 19 and the multiples of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And acquiring this new knowledge of just 100, 200, 300, well, you can now construct any number from 0 to 999. Now you get to the next one. When you complete 10 cycles of 10 cycles of 10, you're at 1,000. That's a new higher multiple of 10. And then you just have to learn those multiples, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 500 to 9,000. And now with that previous knowledge of 1 to 9, of 20, 30, 40, the multiples of 10 to 90, and 100, 200, 300, all the way to 900. With this new knowledge of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, you can now construct any number from 0 to 9,999. And that keeps going. Then you learn 10,000s, then you learn 100,000, 200,000, you learn 1,000,000, 2,000,000, 3,000,000. So you just need to know the basics. And then you construct basically any number that you want to construct to write. The Mesoamerican system, you can do the same thing. So in the decimal system, like I said, we can break it down to multiples of 10. This is a number 1,527. And we can break it down for each position, each digit. 1,527. That's how you say, that's the name of the number. 1,527. With that name, we identify each different space referring to different quantities of multiples of 10. And what we're saying really is in the 1,000 spot, 1,000 is 1 times 10 to the third power, which is 1 times 10 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. The 500 is 5 times 10 to the second power. It's 5 times 10 cycles of 10. 20 is 2 times 10 to the first power, or just 2 times 10. And then the last one is, we can think of it as 7 times 10 to the 0, and that would be 7 times 1, or 7. But each space refers to a different level in these multiples of 10. The Mesoamerican system does something similar, but it doesn't use 10, it uses 20. We will see how that works. So, like I said, we've got to realize that whatever system we use, and I assume if you're listening to this and it's in English, most of the English-speaking world, at least from my understanding, uses the base 10 system, the decimal system. But like I said, that's only one of many, and we've seen many examples throughout history. Some, multiple different systems still exist to this day. The Mesoamerican system is one that is still used in some places, and we can still see its effects on things like toponyms, like place names, language, but also it still is used. It is still used today. So a couple different examples of different systems, and these refer to using different base numbers. Octal means base 8, duodecimal, base 12, hexadecimal, base 16, and sexagesimal, base 60. In this image right here, these are the symbols used in the Babylonian numeral system from a long time ago, and it was a base 60 system, a base 60 system. And briefly, before we talk about that Mesoamerican system, we have to talk about what does Mesoamerica mean? What does this word mean? What is Mesoamerica? Where is it? When is it? So I assume many people have probably heard this term. So Mesoamerica, it's a term that first gained popularity in its usage within an academic context. Proposed by the German and later German-Mexican anthropologist Paul Kirchhoff. Kirchhoff came to Mexico in the 1930s, and basically stayed there for the rest of his life. And he is, to some extent, known as, I guess, the father of this concept or term. He wasn't the first to propose that there were similarities within this specific region over these specific time periods, but he was the first to really take this term Mesoamerica, middle America, and apply it to a specific region, geographical region, and generally associated with specific time periods. We're talking specifically about the pre-Hispanic period, the period before the arrival of Europeans. So, Cortez arriving in Veracruz in 1519, there was some contact in the Maya region a little prior to that, and then the final conquest and fall of the Aztec Triple Alliance, in Tenochtitlan in 1521. So we generally refer to Mesoamerica, we're talking about the time period prior to that, or cultural attributes that derive from that period, and in many cases still continue to this day. So Paul Kirchhoff basically looked at linguistic distributions of different languages and language groups, historical records from the colonial period, primarily to look at distributions of speakers of these languages during this period, and using those distributions and limits of those distributions to define the limits of what he referred to as Mesoamerica. Here we can see basically a map. You can look online and see various different variations of exactly the region of Mesoamerica. Usually we're talking about a few differences in the extreme limits of the region. And Paul Kirchhoff, so he defined the limits of this region, and then very famously made a long list of cultural traits or attributes that included food, agricultural practices, architecture, language, calendrical systems, and various other, like I say, cultural traits or attributes that many of these groups within this region shared to some extent, some more than others, and not all the traits were shared by all groups or found in all regions. But when we talk about Mesoamerica, we're basically talking about a good portion of Mexico. This includes all of Guatemala, all of the country of Belize, usually we include the western portion of Honduras, and sometimes what is included in Mesoamerica includes a little sliver of Pacific coast going down through Nicaragua, and I've seen some maps that even take it all the way to the very extreme northwestern coast of Costa Rica. So that's basically what we talk about as Mesoamerica. And it's a culture area. Kirchhoff defined it as a culture area, taking this concept developed by numerous people, but some, Alfred Kroeber, for example, other Whistler, some famous anthropologists.
And he applied this concept of a culture area, a region, a geographical region, in which groups shared specific cultural traits or attributes. Mesoamerica. Some other culture areas that were developed in this time to identify certain regions was what we've called Oasis America, or in the U.S. generally referred to as the Southwest. But Mesoamerica, it's a term. It can be a problematic term. There's definitely a lot of criticism, critiques of Kirchhoff's original formulation of the concept. Um, why he specifically chose certain traits and not others. A lot of these traits aren't shared throughout the region or during the entirety of the pre-Hispanic period either. But I mean, obviously we can critique that. This was done almost 100 years ago, but the term is still used. It's very commonly used. I'm an anthropologist and archaeologist. I refer to myself as a Mesoamerican archaeologist. Um, I talk about Mesoamerica. So the term still has use and utility and is still generally understood among academics in anthropology and linguistic studies and various other fields of study. It's understood what it means. We're talking about a region, we're talking about usually a time period or cultural traits or attributes, or languages or various other things, food, for example, that has an origin within this region, and the origin is assumed to be um, what we say pre-Hispanic or pre-conquest or prior to the arrival of Europeans. So Mesoamerica. So the Mesoamerican counting system originates from here, and it originates long before the arrival of Europeans, long before that. We're talking about a few thousand years here before that. So Mesoamerica, this is generally what it refers to. This is a very brief discussion. I usually give a lot more time talking about the concept and its strengths and weaknesses in classes that I teach. But for this video, that's Mesoamerica. And so it's a geographic region with shared cultural traits, and roughly here it is on the map. So Mesoamerica, when we talk about Mesoamerica, when we're talking about a culture area within this region, within this area, over thousands of years, we can see what we refer to as the development of complex society. The term civilization is often used, although, at least from my experience in academic circles, there's been a preference, at least more recently, for using the concept of complex society as opposed to civilization. There's some certain connotations of civilization that can be problematic. The complex society, I find it more useful as well, because we can focus on specific aspects of complexity, um, cultural components, social, economic, political complexity, and we can look at how they are complex individually, because some previous definitions of civilization were basically laundry lists of different attributes, and if a region or society didn't have all of those traits, maybe it wasn't a civilization. It's like, okay, well, Andean or in coastal Peru as well, South America, one of the other areas in which complex societies first arose, Peru, for example. A lot of people from the Inca, but we're talking about like um, over 4,000 years before the Inca, coastal Peru. We have the Norte Chico, or sometimes known as the Caral Supe complex, where we see some very, very obvious signs of social complexity and political complexity and monumental architecture, 3,000 years BC. But in the Andean region in coastal Peru and in the Andes in South America, they're never really developed, at least from my understanding, a fully functional writing system. And some definitions of civilization say, well, they have to have a writing system. Well, everything else suggests that we're talking about a civilization aside from, they had record keepers, they had record systems like that. But from my understanding, nothing that is really defined as a fully functional writing system. Well, just because that wasn't there, every other, I would still consider um, South America to have developed very, very complex civilization. So we can talk about complex society within Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica is often referred to as one of the cradles of civilization, one of six in the world. Egypt, Mesopotamia, and primarily in what is modern day Iraq. China, we have the area of Pakistan, India, the Indus River, the Harappan civilization, what is known as the Indus Valley civilization. And then in the Americas, we have South America, like Peru primarily, and then the sixth one is Mesoamerica. So where we see the development in an independent form. So this did not develop with contact from other complex societies. It developed in situ in this region. So we see complex forms of social stratification, the development of classes, elites. And in later times, we see multiple different class levels. We have commoners, we have minor elites, we have the elite, but a very complex and well-developed systems of social stratification, because this varies over time within Mesoamerica as well. We can't talk about the region as being fully uniform and lockstep with all these developments, because in some places we see some developments later than others within Mesoamerica. But in speaking in general terms, so we see forms of economic specialization, the development of different forms of labor and work, people that focused primarily on agriculture, on various crafts, pottery production, lithic production, the production of stone tools, or obsidian in the case of Mesoamerica was the primary raw material used. We see people that specialized in metalworking and gold working and feather working and various other people that were dedicated, focused, or their jobs were within the religion of the region. They served as priests or various other words we can use for them. But a grand diversity of different economic foci. We see the development of very intensive agricultural systems. Basically, over the last roughly 3,000 years prior to the arrival of Europeans, was the populations of Mesoamerica were agricultural, primarily sedentary. They lived in one place. We aren't talking about hunter-gatherer groups, small bands moving around the landscape. Now, that was the case in prior times, but by, I would say, 1500 to 1000 BC or so, we have a long transition of groups becoming more sedentary and larger and putting more emphasis on an agricultural base until they become fully agricultural. And therefore, we see a lot of investment in agricultural infrastructure throughout the region. The construction of intensive agricultural systems, the construction of terraces, the construction of check dams, cross-channel terraces, raised fields, intensive gardening, the famous chinampas, what we refer, I guess erroneously as floating gardens, although constructed within the lake system of the Valley of Mexico. So basically, we have these groups that have to sustain in large, enormous populations in many cases. So we have different levels and different forms of organization, but in general, all these groups were sedentary agriculturalists. And in some cases, we see construction of monumental forms of intensive agriculture, enormous terrace systems, the construction of hydrological systems, canals, and various things to control the movement and catchment of water. So very intensive. Many of these features you can still see today in the landscape of many parts of Mesoamerica. We also see the development of urban centers, huge population concentration, cities, true cities, states, and later on we see the development of empires, focused in cases on conquest and the absorption of other independent polities under to their control. Two of the most famous ones from Mesoamerica, because there's debate on whether or not some other times there were empires. I've read some articles about Chichen Itza. Well, did it have a very brief empire over northern Yucatan? Teotihuacan, can we refer to it as an empire, at least within like the central Mexican highlands? But at least the two that I think most academics agree upon are the Aztec Empire, the Triple Alliance, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, Tlacopan in the Valley of Mexico. And basically their arrival, what's referred to as the Tarascan Empire, although I've heard more recently focus on trying to use Purepecha, basically including what is all of the modern state of Michoacan. We feel complex political systems, empires, and I say enormous cities throughout the region. Enormous, some of them likely approaching populations, at least during certain times, of 100,000 people. And then we'll associate with that numerous examples of monumental architecture, temples, what we refer to as pyramids sometimes, Teotihuacan, Cholula, El Mirador in Guatemala, and many, many other examples of monumental public architecture. Symbolic systems of communication, writing. Now, this is what I have understand. I'm not an expert on writing systems, but what I have read from experts in various academic articles is that Mesoamerica, many consider it to be one of what I've read, 3 regions or areas in which writing developed fully independently. The other 2 that I understand to be China and Mesopotamia. Some of the arguments from what I understand, there's debate on whether Egyptian writing was a truly independent development or associated with some contact with Mesopotamia, which is pretty nearby. Same with the Indus River Valley, contact with Mesopotamia in the development of that writing system. There also, I've read some stuff recently, not much, but I guess Easter Island, there's arguments over a proto-writing system there. But Mesoamerica, yeah, if someone knows more about that, you can post in the comments about these other regions that I am in no way an expert. I focus on Mesoamerica and the Americas, the archaeology and the history of the Americas. But within Mesoamerica, we do have development of fully functional writing systems, numerous examples in different parts within Mesoamerica. Maya writing, Zapotec writing, the Epi-Olmec or Trans-Isthman Isthman writing. Then we have Mixtec writing, Aztec writing systems, and I saw the book recently came out basically arguing that prior perspectives of Aztec and post-classic writing in central Mexico viewed it as being a simple pictographic, ideographic system. There's been, I forget the name of the author at the moment, the book just came out basically arguing that no, it was a very complex writing system. But numerous examples within Mesoamerica. And we do see in Mesoamerica development of institutionalized and formalized leadership. So various attributes of complex society. So very complex societies developed within Mesoamerica. One of those is writing and record keeping. And we do see the development of very complex hierarchical religious systems within the region too. So now we get to the Mesoamerican counting system. We have ways of saying the numbers and there are ways of writing the numbers, like basically most other systems. So one of the main characteristics of the Mesoamerican writing system is that, like I said, it's not base 10, it's base 20, vigesimal. It's a base 20 system. Base 10, like we looked at earlier, basically we do cycles of 10. So 1 to 9, once we get to 10, that's 1 cycle of 10. 20 is 2 cycles of 10. 50 is 5 cycles of 10. 77 is 7 cycles of 10 and 7 more, not quite getting to that 8th cycle. And when we get to higher numbers, 1,324, for example, is 1 cycle of 10 cycles of 10 for 1,000. 3 cycles of 10 cycles, no, 1 cycle of 10 cycles of 10 cycles of 10 is 1,000, yes. 300 would be 3 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. 20 would be 2 cycles of 10, and 4 is what we need, that we're a little short of getting to that next cycle. Well, in this case, instead of having 10 as that base, it's 20. It's a base 20 system. It's present in many parts of Mesoamerica. It's the primary and was and still is used in some areas to this day. Primary counting system, that base system. We find it both in regions and during periods in which there exist writing systems in some regions. For example, the Maya writing system is, I assume, the most famous and well-known system of writing in Mesoamerica, used for a very long period of time. We find examples from the formative period to the post-classic period, and we know so much about the Mayan system because there's so many examples of it. There's thousands of texts, primarily written in different stone monuments, but also on ceramics, and we have a few examples of codices, writing books, basically books. We have a few examples of books from the pre-Hispanic period that still exist to this day. But we have so many examples of this writing system. But there are other systems as well that oftentimes didn't have such longevity or geographical distribution as the Maya system. So like I said, we find examples of this counting system not only in regions and during time periods that have writing, but also in regions and during periods that we don't see a use of a writing system, but we do see the use of this counting system. And it also functions, this base 20 system, it functions as the primary base for the Mesoamerican long count system. It's oftentimes referred to as the Maya system or Maya long count, although the earliest examples we have of this system are not found within the Maya region. They're found on the Pacific coast, Chiapas, and Mexico and Guatemala, and examples on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, primarily in the state of Veracruz. The La Mojara Stele or the Tuxtla Statuette are some examples, and we have other monuments on the Pacific coast. It's basically the Trans-Isthmian corridor where we find the earliest examples of this long count system. Now, some might know of it just because of the whole 2012 thing. The Maya calendar says the end of the world, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, that's silly. What isn't silly is it was a very complex calendrical system for recording very specific dates. We can have dates down to the day. Here we have an example of it in the left-hand side. Vertically arranged, 5 different numbers. This is an example of a date within the Mesoamerican long count system using 5 different numbers and multiplying them by different values. 4 of the 5 use a base 20. One uses, if I remember right, a base 18. You only get the maximum you can get in I think the second value is 18, but the rest use this base 20. So we're not going to talk about the long count system. We're going to talk about the general counting system here.
So now to start with the actual numbers involved in this counting system, and this was the Mesoamerican system is base 20, which is the vigesimal system. This can be found basically throughout Mesoamerica over a very long period of time, and like I said, it's still in use in some places today, base 20. Now, I have found that it's easier when we talk about a different system that we try to use the vocabulary of that system. It's a lot easier to try to think of that system in its own terms than to try and filter it or translate it through our system. The same with languages. If you learn a second language, for example, now you start out, oftentimes at least, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, I speak English fluently and I speak Spanish very well. I teach classes in Spanish in Mexico that are not language classes, that are anthropological, archaeological classes, and I have to teach them in Spanish. But when I started learning Spanish, yeah, I had to think of everything in terms of English. I had to keep having to translate everything. Well, that word in Spanish means this in English. When I wanted to say something in Spanish, I had to think of the phrase in English, try to translate it, then to say it. When someone responded to me, I would hear them in Spanish, and I would have to translate that, go back to English, and keep working through this process until I finally got to this point where I don't really have to do that anymore. I can think in Spanish, I can speak in Spanish, I can listen in Spanish, and I don't have to run hardly anything through English. Well, we kind of want to do that with different counting systems as well, because like I said, the names that we use in English for numbers in the decimal system, the names derive from it being a decimal system. 2,461, that's the name of that number. And we have to basically identify the name, non-zero values in each digit. That's where the name comes from. So 2,000, first digit, 400, second digit, 60, third digit, 1, fourth digit, and they all refer to different multiples of 10. So if we try to only use that vocabulary to work with a system that's not a base 10, like the Mesoamerican system, well, it gets even more complicated. So I want to use the names of these numbers And I'm going to use the names as I learned in Nahuatl. Nahuatl, very widely spoken language indigenous to Mesoamerica. Nahuatl comes from the Uto-Aztecan linguistic family, and there are over 1 million speakers of this language to this day in Mexico and in various other parts. There's a little bit in Central America, and with a recent migration to the U.S., there are many Nahuatl speakers in some parts of the U.S. The majority are still in Mexico, primarily kind of what we call like the Central Highland region of Mexico. Now, I took a few classes. I don't speak Nahuatl, but I've taken a few classes, so I know some vocabulary, and I took classes that were specifically Nahuatl from the region known as the Huasteca, in like northern central Veracruz. So Huasteca Veracruzana, Nahuatl Huasteca Veracruzana. Now, my pronunciation is admittedly pretty bad, so I apologize for that. But I want to use the words because these words are the names of these numbers come from it being a base 20 system. So it's easier to use those numbers, those names, than try to use the English or Spanish number names that are both they use the same decimal system. So I'm going to try to use these words instead. So like I said, with a base 10, we learn the basics, and then understanding how the system works, we can construct basically any number we want. In the decimal system, my experience was I learned 1 to 19, and then I learned the multiples, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. And just with that basic understanding, I was able to construct all the different numbers in between. If you know 1 to 9 and you know multiples of 10, you can make a number 54 or 67 or 73 if you know how the system works. And then you keep adding higher multiples to that base of understanding, and you construct so many different numbers. You don't have to memorize every single number that exists. You have to understand the system to do it. So we're going to look at the basics of the Mesoamerican system. And we're going to start with, in this case, what are the equivalents of 1 to 19 or 1 to 20. So we first have 1, or uno in Spanish. Well, se is the word commonly used in Nahuatl, the Huasteca. Now, there are other versions of Nahuatl, dialects, regional variants of Nahuatl, and most of them, from my understanding, I'm no expert in this, use some variant of se. Now, there is no general agreed upon way to write the Nahuatl language. So sometimes you'll see various different spellings. We're going to see a word one, and I learned it in my class. It was taught to us as the common way to write it was W-A-N, but I've also seen it commonly written as H-U-A-N, one, which means and or with. And we'll see that in some of these the names of these numbers. So 1, se. 2, ome. 3, or tres in Spanish, eyi. Nawi, makwili. So we got 1 to 5. That's the first 5 numbers. Se, ome, eyi, nawi, makwili. Then we get to 6. It's chikwase. Now we can see within chikwase that there's a variant of se included, which is 1. So what this kind of really can be translated to is 5 and 1, or 5 with 1, chikwase. Chikome, we can identify the number 2 within there, or ome, chikome, which can be translated to 5 and 2, or 5 with 2, for 7, chikome. Chikweyi, again, we find the number 3 within there, eyi, chikweyi, can be translated to in some form as 5 and 3, or 5 with 3. Chiknawi, we find 4 in there, nawi, kind of translates to 5 and 4, or 5 with 4. So we got 1 to 5, and then the next ones are to some extent, they're like 5 with 1, or 5 and 1. 5 and 2, 5 and 3, 5 and 4. We get to 10, maklakli, maklakli. And I said my pronunciation's really bad. I apologize for that. So first 10 digits are se, ome, eyi, nawi, makwili, chikwase, chikome, chikweyi, chiknawi, maklakli. Now, in English, the next number would be 11. In Spanish, it would be once. but those are decimal. So we have maklakli 1 se, which translates to maklakli 10, 1, which is and or with, se, 1, 10 and 1, or 10 with 1. 12 maklakli 1 ome, 10 and 2, or 10 with 2. Oh, 10 con 2. Maklakli 1 eyi, 10 with 3, or 10 and 3. Maklakli 1 nawi, 10 and 4, or 10 with 4. And we get 15, kashtoli, kashtoli, kashtoli. Now to get to, in English, the next number would be 16. In Spanish would be 16. They mean the same thing, 16, 10 with 10 and 6. Now, but kashtoli, the next one we come up with is kashtoli 1 se, which translates to 15 with 1, or 15 and 1. So the next one is 15 and 2. Kashtoli 1 ome. Kashtoli 1 a, 15 and 3. Kashtoli 1 nawi, 15 and 4. And we finish this with 20 in English, or 20 in Spanish. Well, in this system, it's simpuali, simpuali. Now we can see here the first two say. We can see say, S and E, say. Well, say is 1. So we finished one in this system, because it's a base 20, we finished one cycle of 20. Puali, in one of the translations, it means something like count, and a count being 20. So simpuali, se y puali, literally means one count of 20, or one count. We finished one cycle of 20 here. That's our base. In English, it's 1 to 10 is kind of that base. In Spanish as well, it uses the same system, 1 a 10. But here, we're finishing that cycle of 20. So from 1 to 20, we have se, ome, eyi, nawi, makwili, chikwase, chikome, chikweyi, chiknawi, maklakli, maklakli 1 se, maklakli 1 ome, maklakli 1 eyi, maklakli 1 nawi, kashtoli, 15, kashtoli 1 se, 15 and 1, kashtoli 1 ome, 15 and 2, kashtoli 1 eyi, kashtoli 1 nawi, isimpuali. Now with this understanding of these first 20 letters, what we need to learn next are the multiples of 20, and we can construct any number between. So if we learn how to say 40, well, basically to make a number like 47, we would need to know the number for 2 cycles of 20, 40, and the number for 7. Here we see the number for 7 is chikome, and we can construct that. Now it's similar to in a decimal system where we learn 1 to 19, 1 to 20, and then we learn those multiples, 20, 30, 40, 50. Now, if we learn the multiples and we learn 1 to 9, we can construct any of those numbers getting up to 100. If you know 90 is 9 cycles of 10, 90, and you know 1 to 9, you can construct 91, 92, 93, 94. See, now we know this base, 1 to 20. Now we're going to learn the multiples of 20 to construct all the numbers in between. So we're at multiples of 20 now. Like I said, we just saw 20, simpuali. Now, simpuali, se is 1. Puali is, in this case, means something like count. A count being 20, so it literally means one count of 20. Se y puali, simpuali, one count of 20. The cycle is 20, the base is 20. So the next number would be 40. In English, it would be 40. That's the name for it. Now, the name for it here is ompuali, ompuali. Ome, 2, puali, count. So this number is basically called two count, or 2 counts, which means 40, because it's 2 counts of 20. Eshpuali, 60, comes from eyi ipuali, eshpuali, which literally means 3 counts of 20, 320, or 3 counts of 20, 60. In English system, and in the decimal system in general, we are 30, 40, 50, 60 means 20, 2 counts of 10. 30, 3 counts or cycles of 10. 40, 4 cycles of 10. 50, 5 cycles of 10, because 10 is the base, and here it's 20, so we're counting multiples of 20 instead. Eshpuali, so nachpuali, well, it comes from nawi and puali. Nawi is 4. That's 4 counts, 4 cycles of 20. Nachpuali, makwil puali, again, makwili is 5. Puali, count. So we've got 5 counts. It literally means 5 counts of 20, which is 100 in the decimal system. In this system, it's called Makuyapoali. Chikwasempoali. Chikwase was 6. Poali, count. 6 counts of 20, that's 120. Chikwasempoali. Chikome Poali comes from Chikome and Poali. Chikome is 7. Poali count, so we're talking about 7 counts of 20. Or in a decimal system, it would be called 140. And this continues. Basically, Chikweyi is 8. 8 counts of 20. Chiknawi, Poali. Well, Chiknawi is 9. And Poali is count. So this literally means 9 counts of 20. And Maklak Poali means 10. 10 counts of 20. So from these multiples, what we can do is we can take that prior knowledge of 1 to 19, say, ome, eyi, nawi, makwili, chikwase, chikome, chikweyi, and we can construct numbers between all these different multiples. For example, 89, the number 89. Well, in this system, well, we can see that 80, 4 counts of 20, Nakpwali, is 80. 9 is Chiknawi. So basically, we would call the number of 89 in English and decimal system. In this system would be Napwali 1 Chiknawi, which means 4 counts of 20, Napwali, with 9 Chiknawi. 4 counts of 20 with 9 in 89 in a decimal system. So we have to find the nearest multiple of 20, and then we have to fill in the rest of that number. So if we had a number like 93. Well, 93 decimal, 93 means 93 is 90, 9 cycles of 10, and 3 more, because we're using a decimal system. Here, 93 would actually be, we'd find the nearest multiple 20. In this case, that would be 80, or Napwali. Napwali is 80, but we still need 13 more. So 13 more would be Maklakli 1 Ehi, which is 10 with 3, 13. So the way to say 93 in this system would be Nakpwali 1 Maklakli 1 Ehi, which translates to something like 4 cycles of 20, 80, with 10, Maklakli, with 3, because 13 is 10 with 3, Maklakli 1 Ehi. So we have to construct those numbers using the base 20 and not the base 10. So we're going to continue with the multiples, because now in the decimal system, the multiples of 10 go from 10, 20, 30, up to 90. Once you finish 10 cycles of 10, that's when you have to add an extra digit, the 100 space. Well, because this system is a base 20, you complete that same cycle, but you complete it when you've gotten to 20 cycles of 20 instead of 10 cycles of 10. 20 cycles of 20 in the decimal system is called 400. But in that case, that's where we complete a cycle here. So we have to learn the next multiples of 10. We've gotten from 1 cycle of 20, Simpuali, to 10 cycles of 20, Maklakpuali. We're going to keep going. So here we go. We have 220 would be 11 cycles of 20 in this system. Now remember 11 is Maklakli 1 Se, which literally means 10 with 1, or 10 and 1. So to say 11 cycles of 20, well, 11 is Maklakli 1 Se. Powali, remember, we're using that as count, which means 20. So 220 in this system would be called Maklak Powali 1 Simpwali, which would translate as Maklak Powali, 10 cycles of 20, 1 with or and Simpwali, 1 cycle of 20. So the number is literally called 10 cycles of 20, or 10 times 20, or 10 cycles of 20 with 1 cycle of 20. That would be 220. That'd be a total of 11 cycles of 20. Maklak Powali, 10 cycles of 20, 1 Simpwali, 1 cycle more of 20. Because 11 in the system is 10 with 1, Maklakli 1 Se. And the same applies to 12, 13, 14 cycles. 240 is 12 cycles of 20. 12 is Maklakli 1 Ome. So to say 12, so 12 or maklakli 1 ome cycles of 20, it would be maklak puali, 10 cycles of 20, 1 om puali, 2 cycles more of 20. 10 cycles of 20 maklak puali with om puali, 2 cycles of 20. And it keeps going that way. So 260 is actually 30, it's 260 in a decimal system means we have 2 cycles of 10 cycles of 10, which is 200, and we have 6 more cycles of 10, which is the 60. So what we're really saying in a decimal is 2 cycles of 10 cycles of 10, 200, with 6 cycles of 10 more. But in the base 20 system, what we're really saying is we have 13 cycles of 20. 13 is maklakli 1 ehi, which literally translates as 10 with 3. So the way to say 13 or 10 with 3 cycles of 20, it's maklak puali 1 esh puali. Maklak puali, 10 cycles of 20, 1 esh 1 with or and esh puali, 3 cycles of 20, because esh comes from ehi, it's ehi puali, esh puali. And 280 is the same thing. 280 in decimal is 2 cycles of 10 cycles of 10 with 8 cycles more of 10. It's 200 with 8. But in this system, it's 14 cycles of 20. 14 is maklakli 1 nawi, 10 with 4. So 10 with 4, 20 cycles, or 14 cycles of 20. Maklak puali, 1 nak puali. Maklak puali, again, 10 cycles of 20 with nak puali, 4 more cycles of 20. 300 in decimal means that we have now completed 3 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. But in this system, it's actually 15 cycles of 20. Well, 15 is kashtoli. So 15 cycles of 20 is kashtopawali. Combination of puali and kashtoli. 320 is 16 cycles of 20. But remember, 16 is basically 15 with 1. Kashtoli 1 say. Kashtoli 15 with 1 say 1. So 16 cycles of 20 is actually 15 cycles of 20 with 1 more cycle of 20. Kashtopawali, 1 simpwali. 340 is actually 17 cycles of 20. 17 is kashtoli 1 ome, which literally translates to 15 with 2. So 17 cycles of 20 or 15 cycles of 20 with 2 cycles of 20 is the correct way. It's kashtopawali, 15 cycles of 20, 1 ompwali, 2 cycles of 20. 360 is 18 cycles of 20. 18 is kashtoli 1 eyi, 15 with 3. So the way to say 18 cycles of 20 is actually you say it as 15 cycles of 20 with 3 cycles of 20, which is kashtopawali, 1 eshpawali. 380, well, it's 19 cycles of 20. 19 is kashtoli 1 nawi. So 19 cycles of 20 is actually 15 cycles of 20 with 4 cycles of 20. Kashtopawali, 1 napwali. Now, when we get to 400, we're completing 20 cycles of 20. That's a big deal. It's like in the decimal system, when you complete that 10th cycle of 10, you have to go up a multiple of 10. You're working with 2 digits from 10 to 99. When you complete that 10th cycle of 10, you get to 100. You have to add another number, another multiple higher up. Well, in this system too, because 20 cycles of 20 is completing that initial cycle. So 420 times 20. Well, we get away from the puali now. Sontli. So say Zontli in this case is understood to represent 20 cycles of 20 or 400. So say Sontli, say is 1. So what this means is 1 400 or 1 20 cycles of 20. Say Sontli. And we already know that the counting from 1 to 19. So in this system, say Zontli is 20 cycles of 20. 1 20 cycles of 20 or 1 400. So Ome Sontli would be 2 times 20 cycles of 20. So that'd be 800, and then it continues. So to look at the next value up, we've got 400 in the decimal system, which means we've completed 4 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. But in this system, we completed 20 cycles of 20. That's a big deal, like I said. It's like when you complete 10 cycles of 10, in the decimal, you go from 99 to 100. You got to add another digit. You got to go up a multiple scale. Now, when you complete 10 cycles of 10 cycles of 10 in the decimal system, you're going from 999 to 1,000. You're going up another level. Well, this is going up a level of multiples in the 20 base 20 system. So 400 would be 20 cycles of 20. So it's say sontly. Say is 1. Sontly refers to the quantity of 400, which refers to the completion of 20 cycles of 20. So to go up another, you know, in the decimal system, we would have 100, then 200, then 300. Well, this we're having 1 of 400, 2 of 400, 3 of 400, 4 of 400, 5 of 400. So we're going to use those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and combine them with sontly to get those multiples. So 800 in this system is actually 2 times 20 cycles of 20. 2 is ome. So ome sontly means 2 times 400, or 2 times 20 cycles of 20. Now 1200 is the next multiple, and it would be 3 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. Well, 3 is eyi. So eyi sontly would be the equivalent of 1200 in a decimal system. Eyi sontly, 3 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. 3 cycles of sontly. And then it keeps going. So we know 1 to 19. So it's say sontly, ome sontly, eyi sontly, nawi sontly, and maquili sontly. It keeps going up. We just keep going 1 to 9 because we already know 1 to 19. This is that new bigger number. It's like when you learn 1,000. Well, we already know 1 to 9, so it's just 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. Oh, we got to 1,000,000. Next level. Well, I know 1 to 9, so okay, it's 1,000,000, 2,000,000, 3,000,000, 4,000,000, 5,000,000. Well, it's the same concept here. Sontly is that 20 cycles of 20. It's the next level, so it's just going to be 1 sontly, 2 sontly, 3 sontly, 4 sontly. Keeps going until you've completed another 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20, and then you have to go up again. Now, 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20 is 8,000. So that's that next step. Well, how do you say 8,000? Well, shikipili refers to 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. Now we're just going to, again, apply our knowledge of 1 to 19, and that's how we work with these multiples. Say shikipili. Say is 1. Shikipili refers to 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20, or 8,000. So the next number up would be, in the decimal system, would be 16,000. But in this system, it actually is 2 cycles of 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. It's 2 shikipili, or ome. Om shikipili, ome, and shikipili, ome 2. Shikipili, 8,000, 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. Om shikipili. And we just keep going with eyi for 3 and shikipili, and then nawi for 4 and shikipili. We can keep going up. So we do have to look at how we actually construct these numbers. So that's the basics of a knowledge of the system, but we have to know how to apply them. This number in decimal is 37. Right here, it's written in a decimal system. We understand the 3 to mean 3 cycles of 10. Now, if the 3 were the last number, we would just learn and understand it to be 3. But since it's this one spot over, we understand that spot to mean cycles of 10. So this means 3 cycles of 10 and 7 more, which is 37 in English. It's 37 in Spanish, but we're not working base 10 here. We have to go to the nearest multiple 20 that's below this number. So 37. 2 cycles of 20 would be 40. We're not quite to 40, so 20. So this number would actually be 20 and 17. But 17 is the name is literally 15 with 2. So we need it's the name of this number would actually be what translates as 20 with 15 with 2. Simpuali, 20, or 1 count of 20. Say, simpuali, 1 cashtoli, 1 ome. Because remember, 17 is actually written as 15 with 2. Cashtoli is 15. Ome is 2. So what this is literally, the name of this number is simpuali, 1 puali, with kashtoli, 15, with 2, ome, 2. Simpoli, 1 kashtoli, 1 ome. Another number, another example. So we've got the number 794 in decimal. Now we understand this to mean the 7, what does a 7 mean? Well, it means 7 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. Or 7 times, we refer to it as the hundredth space, 7 times 100, 700. But what it really means is when the base 10 system is it's 7 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. Now the 9 in that second spot tells us that it's 9 cycles of 10. And the 4 is just a 4. We haven't quite completed that next cycle yet. Maybe it'll get there, maybe it won't. But what we have here is 7 cycles of 10 cycles of 10 with 9 cycles of 10 with 4. 794. But we got to work with 20s, not 10s here, when we want to say this number in the Mesoamerican system. So we go to the nearest largest level, multiple, well, 400. 400 is 20 cycles of 20. So we separate out a 400, because if we were to 800, it would be really easy. It would just be 2 cycles of 10, 20 cycles of 20. That would be the number. But we haven't quite got to 800, or 2 cycles of 400. So we got 400 here. Now we want to separate out the multiples of 20 from the 394. That's 380. 380. And we have 14 left over. But 380 is a decimal way of writing it. This way writing it of 380 would be 19 cycles of 20. Now 19 in this system is rendered as 15 with 4. So this number, 794 in the Mesoamerican system, would be Sesontli, 1 Kashtolpawali, 1 Nakpwali, 1 Maklakli, 1 Nawi. Now what that means is Sesontli, well remember Sontli means 20 cycles of 20, or 400. Well Sesontli, say is 1. So we have to go in order. So Sesontli is literally saying 1 cycle, 20 cycle, 20, or the 400. The next up is the 380. Taken out of 394, 380. Now, we can't just write 380. It's actually 380 in this system would be 19 cycles of 20, but 19, like I said, is 15 and 4. Kashtoli 1 Nawi. So 19 cycles of 20 is actually written as 15 cycles of 20 with 4 cycles of 20. Now that's where we see the Kashtolpawali 1 Nakpwali. Now we still have 14 left. 14 is actually written as 10 with 4. Maklakli 1 Nawi. So say Sontli 1 Kashtolpawali, 1 Napwali, 1 Maklakli, 1 Nawi can be translated as 1 cycle of 20 times 20, which is 400. 1 with Kashtolpawali, 1 Nakpwali, which literally can be understood as Kashtolpawali, 15 cycles of 20, 1 Nakpwali, 4 cycles of 20. Then the last part is 1 with Maklakli, 10 with 4, Nawi. It's 400 with 15 times 20 with 4 counts of 20 with 10 with 4. That's how that number would be written. One more. 1345, or in Spanish, 1345. In both systems, we have to list every non-zero digit. In the English system, 1300 or 1345. 1000 means 1 cycle of 10 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. 3 in this spot, in this position, means 3 cycles of 10 cycles of 10. The 4 in the spot we can see here means 4 cycles of 10, and the 5 is just 5. We haven't reached that next 10 cycle. So what we really understand when we see 1345 or 1345 is 1 times 10 cycles of 10 cycles of 10, then with 3 times 10 cycles of 10, with 4 cycles of 10, with 5. Now in this system, a base 20, we got to get to the nearest large multiple of 20. Well, that would be 1200, because 1200 is 3 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. So we can separate out 1200, and we're left with 145 more. So we would render the 1200 as 3 cycles of 400. Remember, 400 was, or 20 cycles of 20 was Shikipili. But it's 3 times that. Now the 145 left over, we've got to break that down into multiples of 20. So the nearest value multiple of 20 in the 145 is 140. 140 would be written as 7 times 20, or 7 cycles of 20. And we have 5 left. So this number would be AE Sontli. Remember, Sontli, in this case, and I think I just recently said it was Shikipile, my mistake. Sontli is 20 cycles of 20. So for 3 times 400 would be 3 AE, 3 Sontli. 1200 is 3 Sontli. It's 3 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. AE 3, Sontli, 20 cycles of 20. So we're left with that 145 still, but we don't call it 145 in a base 20 system. What we call it is 7 cycles of 20 with 5. 7 cycles of 20. Now 7 was Chikome. Now we can see the 2 in there, so Chikome kind of, Ome. So Chikome kind of means like 5 with 2. 7, Chikome 7, and Puali is count. So 7 counts of 20, or 7 cycles of 20 is Chikome Puali. And then 5 more, 5 is just Makwili. So 1345 in the decimal system would actually be referred to as 3 cycles of 20 cycles of 20 with 7 cycles of 20 with 5. Ehi Sontli, 1 Chikome Puali, 1 Makwili. And we can keep kind of breaking it out, but basically when we want to render a number that's we know in the decimal system, in the base 20 system, we have to break it down into multiples of 20. And in the case of 1345, the nearest larger multiple is 1200, which is 3 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. The next level is just the cycles of 20, 145. Within that is 140. 140 is 7 cycles of 20. And then we have 5 left over. Ehi Sontli, 1 Chikome Puali, 1 Makwili. So, we've looked at how these numbers are named, but we also have to look at how they were written. So, pretty common way of writing numbers, rendering the numbers, especially the numbers 1 through 19 in Mesoamerica. This is a common way of writing them using dots for individual 1, 2, 3, 4, and then bars as a value of 5. So 6 would be a line, a bar, or a line and a dot, which would be more like 5 with 1. Now, a bar is valued at 5, so 2 bars is 10. 3 bars is 15. So when you want to write 17, we can see here, you have to write 3 bars, each one is 5, and then 2 more. And that's the way to write it. Now, this is a common way of writing it, and there's some variations. I'm not going to go into all the variations, just a few. But a common convention in the post-classic period, the last few centuries, 4, 5, 6 centuries of what we call the pre-Hispanic period. Aztec conventions, Central Highlands conventions, instead of using one solid bar, they use lines of dots, and a line can get up to 5 dots before you'd have to add a next line. 20, we can see a 20 here, we can see the 400 symbol here, and the 8,000 symbol here. Remember, 20 is 1 cycle of 20. 400 is actually 20 cycles of 20, and 8,000 is 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20. So those were those bases. We're not using 10, 100,000, 10,000 like you would in a decimal system. You're using 20, 400, which is 20 cycles of 20, 8,000, which is 20 cycles of 20 cycles of 20, to render your numbers. And Mayan conventions, Tammy, also we see often case in the use of the Mesoamerican long count system, multiple values, a set of 5 different values to record specific quantities and specific dates, and using that line or bar and dot system to render numbers from 1 to 19. What's really interesting, at least I find interesting about this, really cool, is that, as we've noted, the way in the decimal system, the way you write the numbers and the way you say the numbers all depend on this being a decimal system. Now in the base 20, the way we state the numbers is associated with this way of writing them, which is I think is really cool. So remember, this dot. 1 dot is just 1. Say. 2 dots. Ome. We already learned the names, so now we're seeing how they were commonly written. These numbers: 2 dots Ome, 3 dots Ehi, 4 dots Maui. A bar, or in the case of the Aztec writing systems, a line of 5 dots, but a solid bar 5 Makwili. Now remember, when we get to 6, 7, 8, 9, Right here, well, chikwase. Remember, chikwase came from chikwa ise. Say is 1. It kind of can be translated as 5 with 1. Well, the way you write it is 5 with 1. A bar 5 and a dot 1. Chikome, ome is 2. We can see that within there, and it can be translated to some extent as 5 with 2. 7 is 5 with 2. The way to write it is 5 and 2 more, 5 with 2. A bar for 5 and 2 dots for 2. It's literally written as 5 with 2, and the name of it is 5 with 2, or 5 and 2. Same here. Chikweye, Eye is 3. Chikweye can be kind of translated as 5 with 3. And that's how it was written. That's how you wrote the number, or that's how the number was written. We have Chiknawe. Nawi is 4. And this can be understood as 5 with 4 for 9. And we can see that it's written as 5 with 4. A bar for 5 and 4 dots. And 2 bars, well, we stop with this and that, and we just go with Maklakli, which is 10. But when we keep going, how do we say 11? Maklakli 1 say, 10 with 1. And that's how we write it. 2 bars, each bar is 5, 2 bars is 10, and 1 more dot is 1 more. So it's written as 10 with 1. And the name is 10 with 1. Maklakli 1 ome is 10 with 2, and it's written as 10 with 2. Maklakli 1 a for 13. Well, the name of it is Maklakli 10 with 1 a with 3, and it's written as 2 bars for the 10, 5 and 3 more. It's literally written as 10 with 3. Maklakli 1 nawi, same thing. It's 10 with 4. Maklakli 10 1 nawi with 4, and it's written as 2 bars for 10 and 4 more. Now, when we get another bar for 15, it's now 3 bars, and we stop with this number with this number. It's just kashtoli. That's 15. But when we go up again for 16, we go back to that 15 with 1, 15 with 2, 15 with 3, and it was written that way too. Kashtoli 1 say is 15 with 1. Kashtoli 15 1 say with 1. And it's written as 3 bars, each bar being 5. It's written as 3 bars for 15 and a dot for 1. Kashtoli 1 ome, 15 with 2, 3 bars for 15 and 2 dots for 2. Kashtoli 1 a, 15 with 3. Again, 3 bars, each one being 5. That would be 15, and 3 dots being 3 more. 15 with 3. Kashtoli 1 nawe is 15 with 4. 3 bars for 15 and 4 dots more. And that's how we write the numbers 1 through 19, or that's how the numbers were written, 1 through 19. And you can see the clear relationship between the name of these numbers and the way they are written. It's 15 with 2 for 17, because it's written as 15 with 2. 15 with 4, Kashtoli 1 nawi is 19. The name is actually 15 with 4, and the way it's written is 15 with 4. So we can see that clear connection between the way it's written and the way it is spoken. And to just give a couple examples of the use of some of these words in various places, toponyms, for example. Right now here we see in kind of near the center part of town, little center in the capital of the state of Veracruz in Mexico, Jalapa. There's a pretty prominent hill in town called Cerro Macuiltepec. Cerro, Spanish for hill, but Macuiltepec, well, we can see Macuil comes from Macuili, 5, and Tepet is Nahuatl as well, and it means like a hill or like a peak. So I've seen different translations of this being like 5 hill or 5 peak or hill, place of the 5 hills. But we see Macuili, the number within this place name, Macuiltepec. We have Macuilxochitl. Macuilxochitl, archaeological site in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico. Again, we see Macuili comes from 5. Xochitl, flower. So this can be translated, again, I've seen different translations. The most common one I've seen for this is something like 5 flower or 5 flowers. But again, I've seen various different, slightly different translations. But Macuilxochitl, Macuili 5, Xochitl flower. We see Simpuala or Zimpuala. Now, this is a famous archaeological site near the coast of Veracruz, like the first place where Cortez established an alliance with some of the local groups, so they could, because these groups were kind of under the reign of the Aztec Empire, and they weren't happy with the Aztec Empire. Zempoala is prominently mentioned as one of the earliest established contacts, one of the first major settlements that Cortez came to. They refer to the leader of this city, Zempoala, as they call it caciques. They call it, I think they refer to him as the fat cacique. But Zempoala, we just saw Zempoali. Puala was count and se is one, and Zempoali refers basically to one count of 20. So I've seen a couple different translations of this, but like the place of 20, I've seen one refer to it, the Zimpala, specifically this site, as like the place of 20 winds, but we see the number 20 in this name. Well, there's also the town with the same name right next to the archaeological site. If you ever get a chance to go, it's a cool place. It's a cool site, and it's pretty close to the Veracruz city, or the port of Veracruz. And we also see so in these Nahuatl groups, these group of Nahuatl speakers, so common in the central highlands of Mexico in the post-classic period. The term Aztec was kind of constructed after the fact to refer to all these different Nahuatl-speaking groups that all claimed, that all had this origin in some other place. You often, most commonly referred to as Aztlan. And aside from their own claims, these different groups, that they were not from the central part of Mexico. Many of these groups settled into the Valley of Mexico, Anahuac, but according to them, in their own words, they were not originally from there. They're from a different place up to the north and the west, Aztlan, and they came to the Central Highlands over a period of different migrations. And there is some linguistic evidence, archaeological evidence, all that seem to kind of corroborate the fact that these different groups are not originally from this region, that there are more groups of the Otomangue linguistic family in this region prior, many who still stayed, but waves of migrations of these Nahuatl speakers that came to the Xochimilcas, the Tepanecas, the Chalcas, the Acolhua, the Texcoco, Tlahuicas, from in Cuanahuac, now known as Cuernavaca in Morelos, the Tlaxcaltecas in Tlaxcala or Tlaxcala, who often fought battles and wars with the Aztec Empire. And then the Mexica of Tenochtitlan, Tlatelolco. Now, in many of these, I guess from an academic perspective, we all often refer to as like mytho-histories, because they seem to mix elements of kind of mythology with real historical information. So they're these groups record and talked about these experiences. They're recording a lot of these early colonial documents known as codices. And they talk about these migrations and their travels over a long time. Many of them reference a place referred to as Chicomostoc. Now, if I remember right, and again, I'm not an expert on this, I'm an archaeologist and anthropologist, but I don't focus on questions of like codices. I focus more on economic questions. I'm not expert in this, but from what I understand, there are different variations of these migration stories, and some identify Aztlan as the place of origin, and then the groups passed for a long period of time in this other place called Chicomostoc. Whereas in some other stories, if I remember right, they actually identify the place of origin as Chicomostoc, but is identified as some sort of cave, and the translation, well, Chicome is 7, as we say. So Chico comes from Chicome, 7, and then the word Ostol translates as cave. So something like place of the place of the 7 caves, or something like that. But it shows up in a number of different these origin stories of these different groups. So we can see the influence, see some of these words, and a lot of the use of numbers and things like toponyms, place names, and in other things as well. But I've seen a number of these in the place names. So that's about it. Try to give a little bit of cultural historical context to this counting system, but a very widespread counting system that's still in use today in numerous parts of what was referred to as Mesoamerica. Now, we're talking about Mexico and Guatemala and Belize and these different areas. So it's still used today in some places. It still shows up in language and place names, and we can see that connection between even the Nahuatl, the Huasteca, the words that I was using. That those are words from today. Those people, these groups, these languages, these cultures, these still exist. They still there's over a million Nahuatl speakers primarily in Mexico to this day. These are words. The writing system, the ways of writing those, the bar and dots, is something that was more common in the past. But we can see that super clear connection between how the names of the numbers, and the way that these numbers were written. It's really interesting to see too how these numbers were used in like the Mesoamerican long count system, for example. So that's about it. I hope it wasn't too confusing and that maybe I've learned something. Any comments or criticisms or anything that might be erroneous, that's fine too. You can comment on that, let me know. I do teach some of this stuff. I do teach the numbering system. Like I said, I focus my own investigations more on economic questions in the archaeological record of Mesoamerica, specifically the Gulf Coast of Mexico. So thanks a lot for watching and listening. And like I said, any questions, comments, doubts, or anything you're not in disagreement with, leave a comment, no problem. And yeah, great. Thanks a lot. And hopefully you enjoyed this.